this on a very grand scale, on a global scale, you have the like breathing. Okay. You breathe in, you breathe out. Everything on the planet is a cycle. It goes through a cycle, and credit is no different. The expansion of credit, and then the collapse of that credit through impairment. And then once it collapses so far and you get some creative destruction that reorganizes the value of things, and most importantly, the central banks step in and replenish these monetary units into the system after they think a little bit of creative destruction has occurred, then you get the expansion again. Okay. The problem with this system, because the person would hear that and be like, okay, well, they can just keep replenishing the units. You get some creative destruction and everything just kind of goes along normally without any issues. The problem is, let's go back to our bloodletting example, and I'll just describe this kind of like through a metaphor. When that collapse happens through impairment, if we were bloodletting at 1 bag a day, okay, once that collapse happens and then they replenish it with more monetary units, it's like now you got 2 bloodlettings a day. Okay. Then the collapse occurs through impairment, and then they replenish with more fiat units that they make up, and they put it into the system, and it expands, and everybody's happy again. But now it's 3 bloodlettings a day. Okay. And so what you have is what appears to be stability through the manipulation of the market by creating more fiat units into the system and more monetary and expanding credit. What you're doing over time is you're slowly making the entire system completely unstable to a collapse type scenario. So in the short cycles, it seems like you're like, oh, they've got it under control. If we didn't have the Fed, we would have no stability and everything would fall apart, right? No, if you had actual saleable monetary units, if gold was actually saleable, you would be in a completely different situation than what we're at. But because gold isn't saleable, that's what leads us to this ongoing where we had a gold standard, we come off the gold standard, we're now on a fiat standard, it's backed by oil, and then all of a sudden that one fails. It's because we have not, throughout history, since human history has evolved, we've never had a saleable monetary unit, especially in digital form, that was easily sent between parties. And if you have something like that, you can allow creative destruction to occur, and everything's going to get repriced. And then the people who were responsible when others were borrowing are the ones that then own those assets, and everything resets itself because there's a fundamental level of monetary units. That's an idea that I think few can't really wrap their head around without a lot of like digging and deep understanding of like finance and like how markets work, especially fractional reserve credit markets.
I think that's a great summary. I think that's an incredible metaphor. And I love what you're talking about with how with political money, we don't know the max supply cap, right? It's like monetary subjectivity versus objectivity, right? And we look at the Renaissance, and the scientific boom, industrial era, and like all that happened because we then create a way to pursue that scientific objectivity and get to the facts, right? And it's like monetary wise, we don't have that. It's basically like rain dancing, and Bitcoin is like that scientific process we finally discovered. At least to me, it seems that way.
Yeah.
So
if you had a government body that had so much gold in their reserves, and they floated a fixed ratio, let's say 10 paper units for the 1 ounce of gold in their treasury, and they never allowed that amount to change for the paper currency that rode on top of the gold that was in the vault, and it was completely redeemable. So if you went into this bank and you said, here's my 10 paper notes, I want my 1 ounce of gold, they would swap it right there on the spot. And they would never have to worry because they weren't adjusting that ledger of 10 units to 1 ounce. If a government did that and the government paid for any type of expense that they, let's say they want to go to war with their neighbor and they run up a big bill and they then have to pay for it by future production and not adjusting this ledger. And it results in this massive tax to all the citizens during and following that war to pay for it. What happens after that period of time is there's a big recession / depression for that country as they're paying off all of their liabilities and all of the debts that they basically pulled to the left to go to war. Okay. That makes the country more vulnerable for future follow-on attacks if they're going through this period where they're having to pay back neighbors that they borrowed for or whatnot, because they're insisting on having a sound money, a paper money riding on top of their gold. So you can see how this situation, this very inconvenient situation, that the wants that I have today, I don't want to have to deal with the consequences of these short-term interest of me going to war to go fight this other country that pissed me off in the short term. I don't want to deal with the long-term consequences of that. And so the way I'm going to pay for that is, instead of there being 10 paper units that ride for 1 ounce of gold, there's now going to be 20 paper units. And then I'm going to tax the citizens because their buying power is that much worse when they go to trade with another country that thinks that the value of one of these paper units is, or 10 of these paper units is an ounce of gold that I can go get from their bank. And this situation is what has resulted in gold always failing throughout history. Always. Gold has always failed from a sovereign level. From an individual level, it's obviously protected people during currency collapses. But as a sovereign level instrument, a gold backing has always failed when a paper currency is on top of it. Bitcoin makes this very different. Like for the first time in human history, makes it very different.
Yeah, I do my best to frame it, hopefully as well as you just did, about how this is a technological or perhaps engineering problem, is that gold requires that central management, oversight, and storage, right? And that inevitably leads to this problem, like you're saying. So in talking about that, the failure of gold and everything that we were talking about before with the expansion of monetary units, you mentioned the M2 chart for the United States. So here's that. Yeah. I don't know if, now that we have that visual example, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that in particular, but you were talking earlier about how if we go to any period in American history, this is a line going straight up into the right perpetually into the future, farther and farther. So there we have the 70s and the 80s. There we go out to the 90s a bit later. And then when we're looking at the great financial crisis, we see a uptick here with with TARP and everything else, the bailing out of the banks, the CDO crisis, everything of that sort. But then, like we're talking about, then we go out to the 2020s and COVID, and we see, in my view, what looks like a massive deviation. So I don't know if you have any comments on M2 specifically here, but
yeah, I mean, I had to actually say that the overreaction, the amount of extra monetary units that they added in through COVID, was a result of them just not knowing how bad the pandemic was going to be. And the amount that they've been able to contract it since is also a function of how COVID wasn't nearly as bad as what they had prepared for with the amount of monetary units that they added into the system. So the reason they've been able to tighten as much as they have is because the impact back when they added so many monetary units into the system wasn't as prolonged and devastating to the economy as what they had prepared for. Now, if you pull that chart back up, Luke, look at where we're at from just a trend line standpoint. Like if you were going to extend the previous trend out, you're getting very close to where it would naturally have been if they didn't do any of this anyway, which tells me that you are about to see a swift change in M2 growth. back to what I would tell you is about a 7 to 8% growth rate on an annualized basis. That's what that chart was showing you. So now if you did a log chart of that same one that you pulled up, it would just be a nice straight line that just keeps going from left to right. And so
I'm really fascinated. Sorry to interrupt. I'm really fascinated because that was a question I have written down. I was asking you if you think the COVID stimulus in 2020 leapfrogged the cycle, right? Because you mentioned the 10 trillion, and then you had COVID, which was 5 to 6 trillion, and then before that you had the Trouble Asset Relief Program. You chose 9, 800 billion, 500 billion, or whatever, and that's like skipping an order of magnitude between there. So it seems like that you believe that the COVID was basically skipping an extra cycle, going above that average rate, and now that's the only reason that we're able to tighten as much as we can.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's why you were able to get it back to where it's at. But I would say I don't think they can go much further than where they're at right now. I don't see that happening. Like, you're going to see M2 expand from here. Moving forward. Now, in the next 3 months or 6 months, sure, you might see it drop a little bit more, but on a very zoomed out view of like what you just showed, like that chart is going to continue to just rip at least at 7% annualized from where we're at moving forward.
Does your spouse, do your kids, do your loved ones and beneficiaries know how to access your Bitcoin? Do you have a proper self-custody storage method to where there is no single point of failure? Not from yourself, not from your seed device, not from where your seed phrase is stored. Have you considered these questions? Have you gotten your UTXOs managed? Do you have jurisdictional arbitrage? Have you considered all the trust, taxes, and estate planning requirements that are associated with becoming a high net worth person? Because if you are buying Bitcoin right now, you are going to become a high net worth person. Are you prepared for the amount of Bitcoin you have to skyrocket in value 2x, 5x, 10x, or 100x eventually? That's the time horizon you should have. And so you need to be preparing today for that future. How are you going to custody your Bitcoin? How are you going to leave that Bitcoin for your future generations? Because after all, that's what we do this for, right? You're buying Bitcoin for your kids. You're buying it for your grandkids. And so I highly recommend you start thinking in those long-term time periods now, because companies are coming, charities are coming, high net worth individuals are coming, and all of them are going to realize that having an allocation to a multi-sig collaborative custody vault is going to be something that is of serious consideration for them. So once you understand Bitcoin is a beautiful innovation for not having a single point of failure at the base layer currency, now you have to start seriously considering, how do I have my custody stored where there is no single point of failure? Okay, if you want to learn more about that, please click the link in the description. I have dozens of pages of free educational content for you and videos. I'm happy to help in that free way. And then if you want individual help, I'm also happy to help you join the Bitcoin Advisor, where you can be an ongoing client. You can become one of my clients, and I'd be happy to help you in the years to come to make sure your Bitcoin's protected, to where no matter what, no matter if thieves or scammers or spammers or yourself or your family or whoever, no matter whether it's due to theft or loss, misallocation, misplacement, or just other mistakes, I'm happy to help you and be that voice of reason in the coming years ahead. So click the link in the description. I'd be happy to help. Check it out. Thanks.